She came home on a Tuesday evening with grocery bags in both hands, her keys barely making it into the lock. She was tired, the kind of tired that lives in your bones, the kind that no amount of sleep ever truly fixes. She pushed the door open, expecting the familiar smell of the house, expecting the soft hum of the television, expecting the quiet, ordinary peace she had worked so hard to build. But what she found instead, what she would discover in the next 48 hours, would shatter everything she thought she knew about love, trust, and the man sleeping in her bed. This is a story about a mother named Tasha, and this is a story that, once you hear it, you will never forget.
Before we begin, let me know in the comment where you're watching from. Would love to hear from you, and your support helps this story reach more people who need to hear it. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos.
There are women in this world who carry the weight of everything. The bills, the school runs, the sleepless nights, the dreams they quietly folded up and tucked away so they could focus on someone else's future. Tasha was one of those women. She was 38 years old, living in a modest two-bedroom house in a mid-sized city in the American Midwest, a place where the winters were long and the summers too short, and most people knew their neighbors by first name. She worked double shifts at a distribution warehouse 3 days a week and picked up overtime whenever it was offered. She didn't complain about it. She never complained. That wasn't who she was. Tasha had raised her daughter Vanessa almost entirely alone from the time Vanessa was 4 years old. Vanessa's father had drifted out of their lives the way smoke drifts out of a room, slowly, without a single dramatic moment, until one day you looked around and the air was just clear again, and he simply wasn't there anymore. Tasha never spoke badly of him in front of Vanessa. She believed that a child deserved to form her own opinions about her parents, and she wasn't going to poison that well. But privately, in those rare, quiet moments, when the dishes were done and Vanessa was asleep and the house was finally still, Tasha allowed herself to feel the loneliness. Not the loud, aching kind, just that low, persistent hum of it, like a refrigerator running in an empty kitchen at 2 in the morning. Vanessa was 19 years old by the time everything fell apart. She had her mother's eyes, dark brown and warm, the kind that made people feel immediately at ease. She was studying part-time at a community college, with dreams of going into social work, which her mother said made perfect sense, given how empathetic she had always been, even as a small child. Vanessa was the kind of girl who would notice if a classmate sat alone at lunch. She was quiet, thoughtful, and deeply sensitive, traits that the world sometimes mistakes for weakness, but are actually a form of extraordinary strength. She and her mother were close, in the way that only single-parent households sometimes produce. Not just mother and daughter, but something closer to two people who had weathered storms together and earned each other's trust. They cooked dinner together on Sundays. They watched old movies on Friday nights. They argued sometimes, the way mothers and daughters do, but they never went to bed angry. It had always been just the two of them against the world. And then, one spring, Andre came into their lives.
Tasha met Andre at a mutual friend's birthday cookout in May of the previous year. He was 41, broad-shouldered, with a calm, steady manner that Tasha had immediately noticed. He wasn't loud, he didn't try too hard. He had a quiet confidence about him that she found disarming. The kind of man who asks you how your day was and actually waits for the full answer instead of filling in the silence with his own stories. He had worked in building maintenance for most of his adult life and had his own apartment. He had a small truck, he paid his own bills.
These things, Tasha would tell her best friend later, seemed almost remarkable to her, not because she had low standards, but because she had been burned before and had learned to recognize stability the way you learn to recognize the smell of rain before it falls. They dated for 4 months before he ever set foot inside her home. Tasha was careful about that. She had a daughter, and she was not the kind of woman who introduced every man she met into her daughter's life. She had seen what that could do. She had friends who had made that mistake, and she had watched the fallout. So she took her time. She asked questions. She paid attention to the small things, how he treated waitstaff at restaurants, how he talked about his own family, whether he was patient when things didn't go his way. Andre passed every quiet test she gave him. He was respectful. He was consistent. He showed up when he said he would and called when he said he would call. For a woman who had spent years feeling like she was holding everything together with her bare hands, that consistency felt like oxygen. When she finally introduced him to Vanessa, the meeting went well, better than she had hoped, honestly. Andre brought food. He didn't try to overplay the moment. He was friendly but not intrusive, engaging but not overwhelming. Vanessa was polite, a little reserved the way she always was with new people, but she told her mother afterward that he seemed decent enough. "He's not weird, Mom," Vanessa said, which Tasha took as an 18-year-old's version of a high compliment. He started coming over for dinner, then for weekends. Then, after about 7 months of careful, deliberate steps, Tasha asked him if he wanted to move in. He said yes. He moved in that October. For a while, it was the best version of life Tasha had experienced in longer than she could remember. Andre helped with groceries without being asked. He fixed the bathroom faucet that had been dripping for 8 months. He took out the trash and shoveled the driveway in winter, and remembered how Tasha took her coffee, 2 sugars, no cream, without ever needing to be reminded. He helped Vanessa with her car when it had a problem with the alternator, driving her to school twice without complaining. He was not trying to be her father. He seemed to understand that wasn't his role. He was just present, just helpful, just steady. For the first time in years, Tasha believed she had finally found safety. But there is a version of trust that we place in people that can, when broken, become a weapon. And sometimes we don't see the cracks forming until the whole structure has already begun to collapse. Tasha did not see them at first. Why would she? The cracks were small, and they were hidden behind everything she had hoped for. But looking back, the way she would look back, alone in the months that followed, she would understand that the signs had been there. Small ones, quiet ones, the kind that don't announce themselves, but sit in the back of your mind like a word you can't quite remember. It started with something Tasha almost dismissed, Andre spending what seemed like a lot of time talking with Vanessa. That in itself was not strange. She had wanted them to get along. She had actively hoped for it. But over time, she began to notice a quality to their interactions that felt off. Not wrong exactly, just off. Vanessa would be in the kitchen when Andre came home, and a conversation would start that seemed, by the time Tasha entered the room, to have been going on for a while already. Andre would sometimes lower his voice when he spoke to Vanessa, not whispering, just quieter, the way you might talk to someone when you want the conversation to feel private. Once or twice, Tasha walked into a room and felt like she had interrupted something, though she could never say what. She told herself she was being paranoid. She was tired. She had a history of anxiety that she managed without medication, mostly through routine and exercise. And sometimes when she was sleep-deprived, the anxiety flared up and made ordinary things feel loaded with meaning they didn't have. She reminded herself that Andre was a good man. She reminded herself that she had checked. She reminded herself that she was lucky. But Vanessa was changing, slowly, gradually, and in ways that Tasha couldn't quite put her finger on, but that she felt. The easy, open quality that had always defined her daughter's presence in the house began to close inward. Vanessa stopped joining them for movies on Friday nights, claiming she was tired or that she had studying to do. She ate dinner in her room more often. When Tasha asked if everything was okay, Vanessa always said yes, but the word came out too quickly, too flat, with none of the warmth that Tasha had always been able to read in her daughter's voice. She looked tired, not physically tired, something deeper, something behind her eyes that had dimmed, like a pilot light turned low. Tasha asked once, directly, "You seem different lately. Is something wrong? Is it school? Is it anything about Andre?" Vanessa looked at her for a moment, and in that pause, something passed across her face. It was brief, a flicker of something that Tasha would later describe as an expression she had never seen on her daughter before. Not quite fear, not quite shame, something in between, something wordless and heavy. Then Vanessa smiled and said, "No, Mom, everything's fine. I'm just tired." And Tasha, because she wanted to believe that, because believing that was so much easier than the alternative, let it go. The house that once felt safe now felt heavy. Think about a moment in your own life when you sensed something was wrong but talked yourself out of believing it. Think about the way we override our instincts because we want to protect what we have, because the truth seems too costly, too impossible to be real, because the person we would have to suspect is someone we love. That is what Tasha was living through. Not denial exactly, but something more painful than denial. She was a woman fighting her own intuition every single day and losing a little more ground each time. Tasha started waking up in the middle of the night and lying still in the dark, listening to the house. She couldn't explain what she was listening for, just listening. There were evenings when she came home from work and the atmosphere in the kitchen felt like the end of a conversation rather than the beginning of one. That particular quiet that settles after two people stop talking because they heard a door. She started paying attention to Vanessa's eyes whenever Andre walked into the room. She started noticing how Vanessa positioned herself, always near an exit, always slightly turned away. She noticed these things and she filed them away without labeling them, the way you file something you're not ready to open yet.
Vanessa, for her part, was drowning inside a silence she had constructed herself. She was going to class, she was handing in assignments, she was smiling at people in hallways and answering texts from friends, and going through the entire performance of a normal life. And inside all of that, she was carrying something so heavy and so impossible that she had stopped being able to feel the edges of it. She didn't know how to tell her mother. She had rehearsed versions of it in her head hundreds of times, different words, different moments, different ways of starting the sentence, and every version ended the same way, with her imagining the look on her mother's face, and she couldn't do it. She loved her mother too much to be the one to destroy her.
That is what abuse inside a family does. It doesn't just harm the person it's directed at. It isolates them inside their own love for the people around them, uses that love as a lock, keeps them sealed inside the secret by the very thing that should have set them free. If this story is already disturbing you, tap the like button so more people can hear this warning. Stories like Tasha's and Vanessa's are happening in homes right now that look completely ordinary from the outside. The more people see this, the more awareness spreads. Keep watching. The worst is still to come. It was a Wednesday morning in late February when it all came undone. Vanessa had been sick, or what Tasha thought was sick. She had been nauseous in the mornings for 2 weeks, had turned down food she normally loved, had dark circles under her eyes that no amount of sleep seemed to fix. Tasha assumed it was a virus, maybe stress from school. She made an appointment with her family doctor because Vanessa had not done it herself. She drove her there. She sat in the waiting room reading a 3-month-old magazine and thinking about what she needed to pick up from the grocery store on the way home. She was thinking about whether they needed more coffee filters when the door opened and the doctor appeared. Not a nurse, the doctor himself, and asked her to come back to the exam room. The doctor's expression was composed in the careful, professional way of someone who has learned to deliver difficult news without making it worse. He told Tasha that Vanessa had given permission for her to be in the room. He told Tasha that the test results were clear, that Vanessa was pregnant, approximately 12 weeks along. Tasha heard the words, but for a moment they didn't assemble themselves into meaning. Pregnant, 12 weeks. She turned to look at Vanessa, who was sitting on the exam table in a paper gown, her hands in her lap, staring at the floor. And something about the way Vanessa was sitting, the particular stillness of it, the way she would not look up, the way her whole body seemed to be trying to take up less space in the room, sent a cold clarity through Tasha's chest that she would carry with her for the rest of her life. She asked quietly who the father was. Vanessa said nothing. Tasha asked again, and then Vanessa began to cry, not the ordinary crying of an embarrassed young woman caught in an unexpected situation, but the kind of crying that comes from somewhere so deep and so long held that it seems to break out of a person rather than flow from them. The kind of crying that tells you the person has been holding something terrible inside for a very long time.
What she uncovered in that exam room shattered her reality completely. The man Tasha had chosen, the man she had brought into their home, the man who remembered how she took her coffee and fixed the dripping faucet and drove Vanessa to school when her car broke down, that man. His name was now attached to something so incomprehensible that Tasha's mind kept sliding off it, the way a foot slides off ice, unable to get purchase, unable to stand on it, unable to accept the weight of what it meant.
And then came the second piece. Because while Vanessa was pregnant, Tasha had gone home from that doctor's appointment and taken a test of her own. A test she had been putting off for over a week, telling herself it was probably nothing, probably just her cycle being off from stress. The test came back positive. Tasha was also pregnant, approximately 12 weeks, the same timeline as her daughter, the same man, the same house, the same betrayal, happening in 2 rooms to 2 women, separated by a wall and a set of stairs and 20 years of life. The man she trusted had destroyed the very foundation of her family.
What do you do with information like that? What do you do when the ground under everything you believed has not just cracked, but completely given way? Tasha sat in the parking lot of a CVS drugstore for 45 minutes after she read that test, and she did not cry, not right away. She has said since, in the accounts she would later share with a victim's advocate, that what she felt in those 45 minutes was not grief yet, but rather a kind of white, absolute stillness, the feeling of a mind that has received more than it can process and has simply gone quiet, the way a circuit breaker trips and the lights go out. She sat there in the front seat of her car and stared at the steering wheel and listened to a song she didn't know playing on the radio. And somewhere in the back of her mind, she was already beginning to understand that everything was about to change.
She drove home. Andre was in the kitchen. He looked up when she walked in and said something ordinary. She has said she cannot remember what, and she looked at him, just looked at him. And in that moment, she understood things about him that she had refused to see before. The way you finally see a hidden image in a puzzle once someone points it out, and you cannot unsee it afterward. The calmness in him that she had mistaken for steadiness, the attentiveness she had read as love. The way he had made himself indispensable, made himself central to the household, made himself trusted and needed and embedded so deeply that the idea of doubting him had felt almost disloyal. She saw all of it clearly now, and it felt like looking at something that had always been right in front of her.
She called her best friend first, then she called the police. She asked Andre to leave the house under the pretense that she and Vanessa had been fighting, that she needed a night. He believed her because men like him always do. They believe in their own invisibility until the moment it ends. He went to stay with a friend, and in his absence, Tasha held her daughter on the couch for a long time, and neither of them said anything for a while, and the silence was the most honest thing the house had contained in months.
Ask yourself this: if you were Tasha, sitting in that parking lot, holding that test, knowing what you now knew about your daughter and your home and the man you let into both of them, what would you feel first? Rage? Grief? Shame? Would you even know how to begin? And if you were Vanessa, 19 years old, terrified, carrying a secret that had been slowly crushing you for months, how long do you think you could have held it before it broke you completely? Let us know in the comments, because this is not a distant story. This is the kind of thing that lives in ordinary houses, on ordinary streets, in families that look from the outside, just like yours. This wasn't just betrayal. It was emotional destruction on a level that most people will never have to comprehend.
2 patrol officers arrived within the hour of Tasha's call. They were professional and thorough. Separate statements were taken from Tasha and Vanessa. A detective from the Special Victims Unit was contacted. A case number was opened. The following morning, Andre was located at his friend's address and taken into custody without incident. He sat in the back of a police cruiser, looking, by all accounts, utterly composed. And that composure, more than the arrest, more than the handcuffs, is what has stayed with people who witnessed it. The blankness of it, the absence of surprise. As though he had known this day was possible all along, and had simply been waiting to see how long he could outrun it.
The weeks that followed were among the hardest of Tasha's life. There were phone calls with lawyers. There were medical appointments, separate and together, each one a new kind of terrible. There were conversations with Vanessa that started and started again, conducted in tears and in silence, and in the long, fragile spaces between words. There were nights when Tasha sat in Vanessa's doorway and watched her daughter sleep, and felt a grief so specific and so dense that she could not have described it even if someone had asked. The grief of a mother who had tried so hard to protect her child and had failed in a way she never saw coming, never could have anticipated, never would have believed was possible inside her own home. Vanessa had to make decisions about her pregnancy. They were her decisions to make, and Tasha honored that, sitting beside her in every appointment, holding her hand through every conversation, making clear in the most consistent way she knew how that whatever Vanessa needed, whatever Vanessa decided, she would be there. That was the promise she made, and she kept it. Vanessa's recovery was not linear. Nothing about this kind of trauma ever is. She stopped attending her college classes for a semester and then returned the following fall with the support of a counselor who specialized in trauma and sexual abuse.
She started writing, journaling at first, and then poetry, and eventually a kind of private record of everything she had been through, which she said helped her take something that had been done to her and find a way to hold it that was hers rather than his. Andre was formally charged with multiple counts of sexual abuse and assault. The case was prosecuted aggressively by the district attorney's office. His defense attorney attempted several approaches, including arguments about the nature of the relationship, each of which the prosecution dismantled methodically using documented evidence, medical records, timeline analysis, and testimony.
The courtroom was quiet during Vanessa's testimony. You could hear the ventilation system. People described it later as one of the most affecting testimonies they had witnessed, not because she was dramatic, but because she wasn't. She was clear-eyed, she was precise. She spoke in the steady, careful voice of someone who had decided that silence was no longer something she was willing to offer. She described what had happened to her, and she described what it had cost her. And she looked at Andre while she did it, and he looked at the table in front of him. He was convicted. He received a sentence of 15 to 20 years. He was placed on the sex offender registry. He was removed from their lives permanently. The scars would last far longer than the headlines.
Not every monster lives in the dark. Some of them sit at your dinner table. Some of them know how you take your coffee. Some of them fix the dripping faucet and shovel the driveway and make themselves so thoroughly a part of your life that the idea of questioning them feels like a betrayal of everything you believed. Tasha did not choose any of these. She chose hope. She chose love. She chose the belief that her daughter deserved a father figure and that she herself deserved a partner. The failure was not hers. The catastrophe that followed was not the consequence of weakness or poor judgment. It was the consequence of a predator who deliberately targeted the family and exploited every good thing about them. He chose every single thing he did. That is on him, only him, entirely him. Vanessa is doing better now. There are still hard days, but she is 20 years old, enrolled in college again, still writing, surrounded by people who love her without making her feel fragile. She and Tasha are closer than ever. The way people who survive something together sometimes become closer. The way shared weight, carried honesty draw two people towards each other rather than apart. They move to a new home, smaller and brighter. They still cook together on Sundays. The love between them survived, and that, Tasha says, is the thing she holds on to most. What would you have done if you were in Tasha's place? Would you have trusted your instincts sooner? Would you have known what signs to look for? Share your thoughts in the comments, not just about the story, but about what it made you feel, what it made you think about your own life, your own home, your own relationships. This conversation matters. The family most at risk are often the one no one is talking to. If you want more real-life stories that expose hidden dangers, raise awareness, and remind us that knowledge is its own kind of protection. Subscribe to this channel, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, because every story of betrayal and survivor, there is something worth hearing. Not the crime, the survivor, the courage it takes to tell the truth, the strength it takes to stand up and say, "You do not get to have my silence anymore." That is what Vanessa did, and it was one of the bravest things anyone in that courthouse had ever seen.